Evening, and you are very welcome to the Four Corners Festival. My name is Martin McGill, and I am one of the Four Corners Festival team members, and it's my pleasure to be able to welcome you here tonight. I thought we'd start off with something very interactive, which is if we could find out where you are from the city. So if you are from the north of the city, could I ask you to put your hands up, please? Ooh. Thank you. South? East? West? Outside Belfast? Oh! Thank you very much. Thank you. Gives us an idea. So I want to say huge words of thanks on behalf of Four Corners Festival to Jennymount Methodist Church, to the Church Council, and to the Reverend Alan Larmer for their very warm welcome here tonight, and to accept us for hosting us for this event. So I've had the pleasure over the years of introducing speakers, but I have never had the pleasure of congratulating a speaker on getting a new job since they were asked to be the speaker at an event. So I'm delighted to say congratulations to Dr Lorna Gold on her appointment as the Executive Director of Laudato Si Movement. That was only announced in the course of the last few days. Laudato Si Laudato Si is the name given to the letter or the encyclical which Pope Francis wrote 10 years ago this year, hence the importance of this event, on caring for the earth, our responsibilities and obligations. And Lorna will talk a little bit more about that in a moment or two when I, in a few moments' time, hand over to her. When I was looking at her biography, in fact, I think they could easily have justified a lecture on the life of Lorna Gold. Lorna's originally from Scotland. She's always had a passion for climate justice and sustainable development from an early age. After her primary university degree, she went on to do a PhD in economic geography in Glasgow University. That was subsequently published as The Sharing Economy. Her thesis was the first ever to coin the phrase sharing economy. In 2002, Lorna moved to Ireland, taking up a role with Trócaire as policy analyst and editing the Trócaire Development Review. She then went on to lead Trócaire's policy research and advocacy for almost 2 decades, and leading a number of high-profile research and advocacy projects on climate justice and sustainable development. She has worked as an independent consultant on climate justice, as well as being the chair of the board of the Laudato Si Movement. And that movement that Pope Francis set up to implement his teaching on the environment globally. And that role as chair of the board, Lorna will give up as she takes up her new post later this month. Her most recent book is called Climate Generation, Awakening to Our Children's Future, and I'm looking forward to reading it. Some of us in Four Corners Festival went to the Ulster Museum 2 years ago to watch a film called The Letter, highlighting the concern for the environment, and we will have seen the key role that Lorna played in that powerful film. I promised to be brief, and so I'm now going to hand over to Dr Lorna Gold and ask her to address us on caring for our earthly home.
Thank you. Thanks for that introduction. It's wonderful to see you all. This is such a beautiful hall. The church is fantastic. So the theme of the Four Corners Festival this year, as we've heard already, is home. It's a wonderful theme that invites us to pause and reflect on quite deep questions about what makes a home, around our city as our home, and the plight of those perhaps forced to flee their homes, those who don't have a place to call home. It's a theme that challenges us not to take for granted the blessing of a safe, warm, secure home. And my task tonight is to help open our hearts and minds to look beyond the four walls that we would traditionally call home, and to expand our horizons, to look and explore the idea of our planet as our home, our common home. This idea of the earth as our home is not a new one. It's the cornerstone of Laudato Si on care for our common home, the beautiful encyclical that Father Martin just mentioned and showed you, written 10 years ago this year. It's hard to believe 10 years have passed. Some have called it Pope Francis' love letter to the earth. I like that. And in my talk tonight, I'll be reflecting on some of the key themes of Laudato Si, which draws us into a deeper consciousness of our earth as our shared home. And I will be asking how far we've come in the past decade since Pope Francis wrote the letter. But first, maybe a little bit about my background and my own relationship to home. Home for me is both Scotland and Ireland, as you may have recognised from the accent. I was born in Glasgow and grew up in central Scotland. I would probably say Scotland is home. I think so. I moved to Ireland, however, over 25 years ago now, and settled in Maynooth in County Kildare, where I live with my husband and my 2 children. So Maynooth is really home to me now. And it's always interesting at this time of year when there's a small thing called the Six Nations happening. And it's a big thing in our house, especially next weekend. There's a fixture where we kind of, whoever's winning is the one that we're supporting. But as a child, I learned very soon the fragility of home. When I was 7 years old, our family went through a series of tragedies that threatened to tear our home apart. Within the space of a year, we lost my grandmother to cancer, and then my father in a car accident. And then on the first anniversary of my granny's death, my mum had left the 4 of us children under 7 with a babysitter for the first time. And that night we had a house fire in which our house was all but destroyed. And we escaped with our lives. And we had to rebuild our home from scratch. Something my mother managed to do, an extraordinary woman. And she taught me that what matters most in a home is the love that binds us together, is our family, not materialism and material possessions. What matters most is community, friendship, and faith. And it showed me the strength of the human spirit and the capacity to hope beyond all hope, even when the chips are down and things seem like they're going in the wrong direction. And I have to say that childhood experience shaped me in profound ways, and especially in the line of work that I'm in now, as I'll talk about later, where you're talking about climate change and catastrophe and environmental disaster. The importance of hope and the ability to believe beyond that there is hope. So why is this theme of home, our earth as our home, so important in today's world? When we look around us today, we see that our world is in a pretty desperate state. We see a world that's broken by violence, growing inequalities, the rise of misinformation, and the ongoing destruction of our environment. We see worrying signs that the world is rapidly heading towards the breakdown of a traditional international politics. Even some of the news today coming around trade wars and the breakdown of a rules-based international system. We see an alignment of political power, corporate power, and massive wealth concentrations. And many now are talking of what they're calling the global plutocracy. Plutocracy is really the alliance of power and wealth, which could threaten our democracy and the rule of law that we've come to take and know for granted. It's a world that at times can feel out of control, and we as individuals can feel too small, too insignificant in the face of these challenges. The problems we're facing are so huge and complex that it's easier, and I'll be honest, sometimes an act of self-preservation, of survival, to turn away. It can be exhausting just watching the news these days. And at such times of crisis, where the ground seems to shake beneath us, there's a real challenge to see, is there an opportunity for change? Are the doors closed to change? Well, I believe there is an opportunity. I wouldn't be standing here this evening if I didn't think there was an opportunity to change. I think that opportunity lies in our ability to join forces and find common ground, and to try to remember, to bring back to the forefront an idea and an ideal that has got forgotten. And that is a simple idea, deceptively simple idea, that we live in our common home. We share this earth that we walk on. I think that awakening to this profound reality is at the heart of the mindset change that we need today. And that mindset is essential in order to address some of the urgent crises we're facing. The fact is that we've systematically forgotten, or you could say willfully forgotten, that we live on a shared planet, a common home. And what matters? Why does it matter? People sometimes say, why does that actually matter if you understand if you're living on the shared planet? The reality is that because we've neglected this, we've neglected the whole, we've developed systems in our world, economic, social systems, political systems, that are blind to our limits. This failure to see that we live on one finite planet, which we have to share, is resulting in what's being called the tragedy on the horizon. The tragedy on the horizon is basically the fact that we can see individually what is coming, but we cannot bring ourselves to act together to change what is just on the horizon in time. Our inability to look at the whole is one that has a history. It dates back hundreds of years. And it's particularly prevalent in our Western civilization. In the past 250 years, you could say industrialized civilization, which has tended to focus our attention, our education, our politics on certain dimensions of life, while systematically ignoring the reality that we live on a finite planet and we live within a system of life on earth. That mindset, which has dominated philosophy, economy, politics, society throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, is the system on which almost all of the most powerful institutions we know rests. But it's one which is deeply flawed, that relies on a dualistic thinking rather than one that's integral. It's one that relies on linear thoughts rather than systems theory. It's one that's profoundly individualistic and extractive rather than a relational way of thinking. And perhaps above all, it's an anthropocentric system focused on the centrality of humans in a way that fosters an unbridled, you could say, Pope Francis uses a term around, I think it's naive, but it's a naive optimism or people think they have superpowers to fix any mistakes that we make. That humans have this superpower. We can get ourselves into messes, but sure, we can get ourselves out. The reality, however, is that such thinking and institutional frameworks that we've built together over many decades have failed to recognise one really important factor. Humans themselves exist within a finite world. We exist within a fragile ecosystem which has limits. Our earth is not an abstract thought. We can change, an abstract thought we could change at will if we think about it enough. We can't control the laws of physics. If we do not see and recognise that we have limits, the risk is, and this is what we're seeing, we damage the whole system. And we damage it even beyond repair. I remember when I was at university going to study my PhD, and I was going to study economics. And I started looking at the text and looking at this economics, and I was like, where's the earth? Where's the earth in this, all this theory, all this abstract ideas? Where's the earth in this? And nobody could answer my question. Where the earth, it's a theory, Lorna, it's a theory. But theories translate into practice, and we have an economic system which doesn't acknowledge or recognise that the earth exists. Hence why I studied economic geography, because it was explained to me, economic geography is economics as if the earth matters. We need more economic geographers in key places, I think. The most stark example of this system's failure is, of course, our failure to address climate change. We've had now 30 years of UN negotiations on climate, and still our emissions continue to rise at an alarming rate. And a major part of that is due to the fact that we turn up to these negotiations every year, and I've been to many of them, and every individual country presents the minimum amount that they can do in order to address the crisis without impacting their economy too much and putting them at a disadvantage. So everybody's arguing their little corner. Nobody is thinking from the perspective of the whole and the earth systems. It's all about individual territories marking their territory and saying what's the minimum that we can do. We've become systematically unable to act collectively at that level despite everybody or many people knowing that it's in our best interest to do so. That's the tragedy of the situation. At the same time, however, on the other flip side of this is that there's a growing awareness of living in one shared earth on our common home. And this tendency towards a unified consciousness has been building arguably since at least the middle of the last century. Pope Francis actually mentions this in Laudato Si. He says, beginning in the middle of the last century and overcoming many difficulties, there has been a growing conviction that our planet is a homeland and that humanity is one people living in a common home. And we can see that if you look back, that there are many signs that the world is tending towards this universal consciousness. We could point to the UN, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in the middle of the last century, perhaps the most striking codification at an international level of what it means to be a human and what your rights are as a human living on planet Earth. And over the last 8 decades, this work on human rights has gradually become codified in law and become a critical benchmark in international relations. And all the UN conferences that were held in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, pointed us towards what was kind of like a global constitution based on shared values and a common plan. Those who were alive at the time of the moon landings tell us that that event and that image of the Earthrise was a pivotal moment in the consciousness of society at the end of the 1960s. The ability of humanity to see our planet in its wholeness for the first time, in its unity, sparked a sense of wonder and awe. From a distance, our planet resembles a beautiful marble, a pebble. Its atmosphere, which for us looking up seems so vast, looked so thin, wafer thin, protective layer around this fragile earth. That sense of the wholeness of humanity and the earth and the singularity of a shared earth on which we all walk still reverberates today, perhaps under the surface. It's part of the zeitgeist in which we're living. Of course, nowadays, we're inundated with opportunities to observe the Earth as one planet due to the advancement of satellites that constantly circle us and monitor everything from the weather to the position of aeroplanes. We all carry our personal GPS global positioning systems on us every day if you have one of these little watches or if you carry your phone around. We can practically observe what is happening at any part of the planet in real time from any point on the planet. And it's a wonderful thing to do. I don't know if you've done it, if I should have suggested it, that if you go onto Google Earth, you can pinpoint where you are just now. Us sitting here in this little room, and then you can pan out and pan out and pan out. I used to do it with my kids. Pan out all the way. You see Ireland, you see our side of the ocean, then all the way out you see the earth. And then it goes away tiny, 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 until you see this little pebble in the distance. That image of the earth floating in space led to a whole flurry of reports in the 70s, which underscored the need to shift our economic systems and social systems to embrace what was a blindingly obvious truth. We live on a finite earth with interconnected systems. It inspired the Limits to Growth report in 1973, which sought to address the fallacy of limitless economic growth on a finite planet. And over the last 60 years, fantastic interdisciplinary work has been done to look at the Earth as a whole system. The most influential work is of Earth systems theory, a wonderful kind of cross-disciplinary body of work, which encompasses all the Earth sciences in understanding the limits of our planet. That scientific approach has enabled us to calculate the rate at which we're using up the Earth's resources. We can actually figure out now what our carrying capacity is for planet Earth. And they've calculated that we'd need around 4 planets. We only are within our limits up until about the end of March each year. And then the planet we're living off, the capital of the planet. We're living off future generations. Each year we do this. We know what the limits of the planet are now. We've mapped them out. And in the Planetary Health Check report, which I encourage you to read last year in 2024, it was only released in December, showed that we're currently breaching 4 of our critical life systems out of a total of 7. So what needs to change? I'm not here to give a whole kind of political discussion on all the politics that need to change, but what I want to focus in on is this idea of home. Given what we know about our planetary limits, and given the need to accept and embrace these, we may ask, how is it that this idea of Earth as home, this desire to care for the Earth, is so challenged in our world today? From the perspective of our common home, it's overwhelming. There's an overwhelming truth of our oneness. It's undeniable. And it's like when you see that perspective, when you look at the Earth from that perspective, you realise that truth, it's like all other truths and aspects and dimensions of our reality, all our differences, all the other characteristics we have, need to be embraced within that perspective. We exist within the confines of our earthly home, our planet. And this is why this image of Earth as home is so useful to us. It gives us an image that can help shift our mindset. Because while scientists have been telling us this for a long time, that in order to address our global problems, we need to face up to these limits, we have not found the culture or the will, but I would say it's more cultural, in order to embrace that different mindset. We've been tending towards this reality, but have been unwilling to embrace the cultural shift that helps us to move beyond our old ways of thinking. There are many reasons for this. There's vested interests. There's lots of inertia. But I think there's also fear that if we embrace fully this idea that we are global citizens of one Earth, on one planet, that somehow we have to deny all our other identities and sense of belonging. But that's not the case. We need to urgently embrace new narratives and new images to help us move forward. And the language of science and technocratic language is not really that helpful. I read that in order to, this is from a scientist, so the mindset shift that we need to make is to recognise systemic tipping points in the multipolar, postmodern, AI-dominated technocratic paradigm. Do you know what you have to do? Another way of saying that, that's much easier, is to say, we are all citizens of planet Earth. We live on a blue planet, and we need to come home. If we do that, somehow it means the same thing. The technical jargon is basically saying to us, we need to understand that we're part of a bigger whole and embrace that. And we need to start to live together as if we lived on one planet. The idea of a common home is a wonderful image. They help us move away from this technical language and envisage our world like a home with many rooms, a place where we can learn together, grow together, and share together. The challenge for us is twofold. One is, how do we keep that unified perspective present and grow it every day? How do we embed it in our institutions and in our choices that we make? So I'd like to propose a couple of ideas, 4 ideas that might help us to do that. To help us to live into the earth as our home. And these are ideas that come from Laudato Si. The first one is that in seeing the earth as home, it can help us fall in love once again with our beautiful planet. We talked earlier about familiarity as home. Home is where the heart is. And scientists have told us that we will only act to save what we care for, what we love. And that idea of Earth as home evokes it as a place of intimacy, of familiarity, of love. And in fact, Laudato Si raises up that whole that question of what's your relationship with all God's creatures. For the earth is not just our home, it's the home of all the creatures. It's the home we share with all the creatures. So seeing the earth as home, as homes, helps us. And in fact, for me, one of the biggest changes since I read Laudato Si and started to work on this has been about spending more time in nature. With that idea of getting to know my cousins, my relations, the names of the birds. How can you know them if you don't know their names? That familiarity that is so important and so part of the education, ecological education that we need to bring into our own hearts, but also into our places of education. The second point is that if Earth is our home, then we are all brothers and sisters. And this is somehow been in the politics that we're living today. We cannot reaffirm this enough. But it can't just be a pure affirmation. it needs to become a lived experience and reality. We share our earth as part of a family and have a duty to ensure that the earth is a place of welcome, a safe haven. Our world, we know, is torn apart by these identity politics and the sense of the fear of the outsider, particularly those fleeing war and poverty. So reaffirming our earth as home and our common humanity has never been so urgent. It's not a denial of our diversity as you've experienced in the Four Corners Festival and many cross-community initiatives, but a reflection of our desire to share our common earth. The third point is this. If we accept the earth as our home, then we have to take responsibility to do our part to ensure it's in good order and restore it. It's not the job of environmentalists. It's the job of the householders. And in Laudato Si, Pope Francis talks about our common home falling into serious disrepair. I like that. It's very simple. But the idea that the home is falling into disrepair, so therefore we need to step up as the householders to do what we need to do to put it back in order. In many ways, that call of Pope Francis is an echo of the call that Saint Francis of Assisi heard some 800 years ago when he had a vision in which Jesus asked him, repair my house. The house today is not a small house, or the house is our common home. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, or most relevant in what we're facing today, is that the image of the earth as home revolutionises the way we think about our economy and our political systems. In fact, the idea of an earth as home helps us to return to an ancient idea of economy, which was oikonomia, oikos, the management of the household. It's the origin of the word. It's only in the past 200 years that this oikos, this oikonomia, has been abandoned in favour of an economic model which prioritises money as an end in itself and the unbridled growth of money, regardless of planetary limits. If we're to move back within our planetary limits, we need to rethink our economy and move away from concepts that prioritise growth in favour of a new kind of economics, which is much more attuned to the earth as a home. In fact, you know that too much growth in a human system is a cancer. And what we see today in the disconnect between the financial system and our economy is like a cancerous growth which continues to eat away at the capital of our common home. This means emphasising other economies that are thankfully growing up amongst the weeds in all our communities, whether that's the circular economy, the repair movement, the regenerative economics, agroeconomics, with a focus on the well-being of people and planet rather than the wealth and the gain of individuals. A lot of fantastic work is already going on in regard to this through alliances like the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. And I know, for example, in Scotland, the government there has adopted a wellbeing economy framework, which is quite prophetic measure to take. And then other groups like the Donut Economy Network are very, very rapidly gaining traction at a community level and trying to change the policies at the higher level. So I'm coming to the end now. How can we move forward together? I've outlined several ways and reflected on how we see our earth as home, in the hope that we can help to shift our mindsets and recognise the importance of this idea of a shared home in caring for our earth. The question is what we can do to shift things, given this difficult context we're now living in. There are many frameworks, many groups already working on these areas, many policy proposals on the table around what we need to do and how we need to shift, embracing this concept of the earth as home. What is lacking in many ways is the sense of political will and a culture underpinning that would enable us to embrace our shared humanity and to live as one people. As I mentioned earlier, at times like this, in the crisis we're living in, it's also a time of kairos, of change. When the dice is thrown in the air, there's always a moment when everything can change, for the good or for the bad. And I feel now is the time when we need to step forward, to join forces together, to reaffirm the deep values that we share. I wanted to underscore the role of faith communities in this endeavour, in helping to build a sense of caring together for our common home as one human family. We're at a moment of unique opportunity for faiths in how they step forward at this time. In fact, over the past several decades, faith groups all over the world have become more committed to ecological action. There's an alignment, some might find it very strange, but there's an alignment of intent between the world of science and the world of faith. Most recently, the work of Pope Francis in Laudato Si, and last year the publication of Al-Mizan, the Balance, which is a parallel Muslim text on environmental care, have really given greater focus to the role of faith communities in this area. There's a vibrant multi-faith movement right across the world, working together to promote our earth as our common home. And faith communities bring something truly unique to this conversation. As people of faith, we see the earth as our common home, as a gift that we need to cherish. Moreover, caring for our shared earth is something we can agree on as faiths, regardless of our differences. It's a sacred duty. And when we care for our earth, our home together, we draw closer to each other. In fact, a couple of years ago, I had the pleasure of being with Pope Francis when we filmed the film The Letter. And he said something that really struck a chord with me. He said, today, the work of unity means working together to save our common home. Because faith groups work on so many levels in every part of the world, they're uniquely positioned to become more sustainable themselves and have a significant impact on culture and politics. We need to redouble our efforts, and the work here in Belfast of the Multi-Faith Forum and the Join the Dots Coalition is a prime example of the kind of work that needs to happen. I'd like to end with an appeal from Pope Francis in Laudato Si. Given that what I've talked about, hopefully it's not been too depressing, but it's pretty serious stuff. And sometimes it's hard to stay hopeful in the midst of all of this. But my favourite passage from Laudato Si is quite near the end of it, and I'll just read it to end. In the meantime, we come together to take charge of this home that's been entrusted to us. Let us sing as we go. May our struggles and concern for this planet never take away the joy of our hope. The earth is our home, and together let's take care of it. Thank you.
So again, a huge word of thanks to Lorna for those, I'm going to say, prophetic words. So beautifully and gently delivered, and yet in many ways, to borrow one of Steve's phrases, that really, I think, left us with a depth charge. There's just so much in them, and maybe get a chance to chat with and explore some of those over the tea and the coffee. So can I say thanks everyone, good night, and please, if you possibly can, do stay on.